how do people get it that wrong sometimes? And that was badly, like, that was a massive misstep, I think. But
Yeah.
how I don't know how that doesn't get picked up. Like, how do you think some businesses really get that far out of kilter?
I don't know. It's an interesting question, isn't it? I think partly in the case of Pepsi, they might have been influenced by their past in a way, because they had this very successful campaign historically, which was, about the Pepsi generation, and it was about this sort of co-opting of the counter culture, and I think they maybe felt they had sort of heritage in making that work. So I think they felt they sort of could co-opt a cultural movement. But there is this writer, Douglas Holt, who was writing in the early 2000s, who was pointing out, you can't just co-opt cultural movements. You have to understand the nuances of what's going on within a movement, and you have to have some degree of engagement with it. And I think it may be in the case of Pepsi Cola, it's this sort of temptation to see it just in marketing terms. So this is not, as an organization, we're committed to a social issue, a social wrong. We just think this is a good opportunity to connect ourselves to a set of imageries and hopes and ideas which would resonate well with our brand, we think. But consumers are very good at sniffing out inauthenticity. So I think they see it. And I think it's, I said earlier, you get inside the organization, you have these sort of boundaries to the outside. And there's this big challenge. You see the world from your organizational culture perspective. And therefore you can make bad missteps. It's not just business organizations, governments do that as well, seeing the world from the inside out.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to make, which is the idea that businesses kind of see themselves differently to how their customers see them. And I think that, so I often talk about the gap. So I think that the size of the gap in between how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you varies. So I think that if you're doing very well in terms of, coming across as a very authentic, transparent brand, so say Patagonia as an example again, I would make a kind of hypothesis that their brand gap in between how they perceive themselves and how others, how the audience perceive them, you'd guess is probably pretty small, or if at all there's a gap. Whereas I think it's interesting. I hadn't actually thought about that with Pepsi. I think that they very possibly do have this idea of their own history that gives them the permission to have a place in kind of these youth culture movements. But actually, it doesn't quite work like that, does it? You can't just jump on any on a bandwagon, because then it looks like you're jumping on a bandwagon.